Hello, welcome to another episode of Her Head in Films. I'm Caitlin and I'm your host. On this podcast, I share my thoughts and feelings about the films I watch. They tend to be art house and world cinema. What makes this podcast unique is that I weave together my life experiences with a personal and emotional discussion of film. I explore the impact that cinema has on me and why I connect so deeply to it. As I like to say, my head isn't in the clouds, my head is in films. If the podcast resonates with you and you want to help it thrive, Patreon is where I'm building a more connected space for listeners, offering bonus episodes, extra posts, and a direct way to show support for the work I'm doing here. If you want to be part of that community, join me at patreon.com/herheadinfilmspodcast. And as always, leaving a review or helping spread the word is appreciated. The link to my Patreon is in the show notes. On today's episode, I'm talking about Gabriel Axel's 1987 film Babette's Feast. The film follows two sisters, Martine and Filippa, who live a quiet, devout life in a small Danish religious community founded by their father. One day, a French refugee named Babette appears on their doorstep, fleeing violence and unrest, and the sisters take her in as their cook and housekeeper. Years later, as the community prepares to celebrate the 100th anniversary of their father's birth, Babette offers to cook a French feast that those in attendance will never forget. I talk about what it means to offer something from the heart, how the film explores art and generosity, and how the meal becomes a moment of connection, transformation, and renewal. There are spoilers in this episode. It's probably been a decade since I watched Babette's Feast. As I go about this episode, I'm going to explore why exactly I felt drawn back to this film. I don't know how I do it, but somehow with this podcast, I've been going for 10 years now. This podcast has existed for a decade. When it comes to choosing films for the episodes, I have always been very intuitive about it. And I've always somehow chosen the perfect film for the perfect moment in my life. I don't know how I do it, but there's this inner voice or this inner guide, I guess you could say, that directs me perhaps to the film that I need at a particular moment in my life. I've felt that with art for a very long time, that somehow I find the album, the music, the book, the poem, and the film that is going to restore me or connect me with some part of myself or is going to offer me comfort and consolation. And it's not always that somebody recommends it to me. It's that on my own little journeys and my own little discoveries and deep dives into things that interest me, I just happen to come across art that always feels like predestined, even though I know it's not. But it feels that way. Even though it's been 10 years since I last saw Babette's Feast, this film has lingered in my mind. I am not somebody who rewatches films a lot. I know that every cinephile is different about it. So some cinephiles, and I've had friends like this, they'll watch the same film multiple times within a year or within a short period of time. I've never been like that. So sometimes I will watch a film and a decade might pass before I rewatch it. I think there's something in me that I really like the purity of a first watch, of the initial experience of a film. And I think in some ways I want to preserve that or something where, particularly if I have a very intense experience with the film, I want that to be my memory. And that almost becomes part of my love for a film is my memory of first watching it. Because you can never watch a film for the first time again, right? Like it's not something that you can do over and over again. Just like you can't read a book for the first time again. There's that first encounter with a work of art sometimes that can be just as powerful as the work of art itself, is what you felt as you were watching it. Maybe that's what was happening with Babette's Feast. Or maybe, and this is something I might talk more about later, or maybe I'll just say it now, maybe we're not always ready for a particular film, or there's something in it that we need to live a little bit more in order to fully understand it or to access it. And I wonder if that has happened with me with Babette's Feast, perhaps. As you get older, or just as you go through certain experiences, it can help you appreciate a film in a different way, can't it? Based on what happens in between your first viewing and your second viewing. So maybe that's also why I delay that second watch, is because if I watch it once and then I watch it a second time just a week later, maybe I want more time to pass. Maybe I want to change, or I want to be a different person when I encounter that film again, and I want to see what it has to give me on that second or third watch. A film that I feel like really grows with me a lot is something like Three Colors Blue by Krzysztof Kieślowski. I feel like every time I go back to that film, and it tends to be maybe not annually, but every few years I return to it. I feel like it offers me something different each time, or it reveals something new with every rewatch. And I think with Babette's Feast, there's so much that I noticed in viewing it for this episode after 10 years that was very moving and very beautiful. And so I'm really excited to be able to explore the film and to talk about how it affected me this time. First, I want to start with basic information about the film, the cast, different stuff like that, and then I will dive right into it. Now, with the cast, these are a lot of French and Danish names. I am going to do my best to pronounce them as best that I can, but please go easy on me. We have Stéphane Audron as Babette Herson, and she is our main character for the most part. The film is really about her, but it's also about the sisters. I see the film as being about these three women, and that's something that I really want to dig into, is the lives of these three women and why I find them so interesting and so compelling. We have Bodil Kier as Philippa. We have Birgitta Peterspill as Martine, and both of these women are very highly regarded Danish actresses. We have Jarl Kula as Lorien Luvenhelm, and he's the general. And as I talk about the film, I'm just going to call him the general instead of pronouncing his last name over and over again. And then we have Jean Philippe Lafont as Achille Papin. So I got the names over with. I got through it. This film won the Oscar for Best Foreign Language Film after it was released. It's adapted from a short story by Isaac Dennison. The story was originally set in Norway, but for the film, they changed it to Denmark. Gabriel Axel was around 70 when he directed this film. In his career, he had started out in Danish television, and then he directed films, and he was actually mostly known for comedies. And something else interesting to note about this film is that it was quite popular when it was released. Audiences really liked it. The thing is that in 1985, a few years before Babette's Feast came out, another film was released by Sidney Pollack called Out of Africa. I grew up on this film. I know about it. It stars Meryl Streep and Robert Redford. I don't know if younger people know about Out of Africa, but it's about Isaac Dennison. And so that helped the producers of Babette's Feast get funding for the film, because Out of Africa put Isaac Dennison, really put her on the map, I guess, in America. And Babette's Feast is an adaptation of one of her short stories, as I said. So I felt drawn back to this film. I think I, more than anything, remembered the feeling of it, because when so many years pass, you forget a lot of the details about a film, or at least I do. I don't have the greatest memory. I don't necessarily remember everything about the books I read or the films I watch. What remains with me is the feeling of the work of art. And it's that feeling that I rely on when I'm choosing films for this podcast. And I kind of took a risk because this was not a recent film that I had watched. I easily could have rewatched it and not liked it as much as I thought that I would. And then I would have to scramble and choose another film for the episode. But my feeling about a film rarely ever lets me down. And usually, when a film stays with me, it stays with me for a reason. And when I rewatch it, it always gives me something. And it tends to give me perhaps exactly what I need at the moment that I rewatch it. I think it's interesting to just linger on why we feel drawn back to certain works of art, why they pull us in. I think it's something very mysterious, actually. And maybe there's something in our unconscious that holds on to a film or a book, and then it surfaces right at the moment when we seem to need it. I think there are many reasons why this film appealed to me right now in my life. It's about women who are living unconventional lives. Martine and Filippa are essentially spinsters. That's what we would call them. Or I guess spinster is not a word that's used very often now, but it's one that I proudly reclaim. I even refer to myself as a spinster. I'm 36. I've never been in a relationship. I obviously don't have children. I don't have a partner. And that's very unusual in the world today. I mean, at least where I live. I live in the rural South. So a lot of women my age by their 30s are married, have children, they've at least been in relationships or dated. I haven't. I use the word spinster. It's not like my entire identity. Sometimes I use it self deprecatingly, but I essentially do live that kind of life, and it is off the beaten path, even though I think a lot more women are talking or speaking on social media in particular. They're talking about living a life that is more solitary and not getting involved in relationships, not having children, remaining child free. So maybe it's not as unusual as it was decades ago. But in 1987, and when this film is set in the 1800s. I guess I should have mentioned that in my introduction. You know, that would have been unusual for Martine and Philippa to not have a partner, not have children, not be married, right? So they live these unconventional lives, and so does Babette. When Babette comes to them, she's alone. Her husband and her son have been killed, and I'll get into that a little bit later. She's a woman on her own, right? So these are three women. None of them are married. I mean, Babette was, but she's a widow and she's lost her child. She's lost everything. But she decides to be a cook and a housekeeper for these sisters. That's a very unconventional way of living. We know that she's a chef. We find out that she's a chef. Maybe she could have worked at a restaurant in Denmark, but instead she decides to go to these sisters because of Achille Papin. He's the one that gives her the letter. She's a refugee, and he tells her, go and live with these sisters, and they will take care of you. But at some point, she perhaps could have left, right? Like, I don't know if she had to stay with the sisters forever, but she stays with them. So these are three women living unconventional lives. And that speaks to me, that resonates with me because I feel like I'm on an unconventional path myself. I think it's a film that asks, what does a meaningful life look like? And I think it also asks what we want to offer to other people. Because ultimately, the way that I view the final feast, the French feast at the end of the film, I see that as an offering by Babette to the community and to the sisters. There are religious interpretations of this film. Things connected to Christianity and all of that. I'm choosing to not go down that path with the film personally. I'm going to be talking about my own feelings about it. I don't really approach the film as a religious person. I am an atheist. I am not Christian, not religious in any way. There's certainly that interpretation. I think the film is open to multiple interpretations. I don't think there's only one way to watch it or to think about it. And so for me, I'm not going to bring theology into this episode. So if anybody wants that or expects that, that's not what I'm offering. I'm really focusing on these women. I'm focusing on the offering of the meal and the meaning of the meal as well. It is a film about connection, community, generosity, nourishment. It's a film about being an artist. Babette is a chef. Food is her art, and that is the gift that she offers. Filippa also is an opera singer, and so I see her as an artist as well. But she doesn't, I mean, neither her nor Babette really get to fully bring into being all of their artistic potential. Babette has to flee France and the Cafe Anglais, and she gives up that artistry for a very long time. She gives up being a chef, and Philippa gives up the opera singing to serve this religious community along with Martine. And I recently did an episode about The Red Shoes by Palin Pressburger, and I see that film as a portrait of a female artist. And I am a creative person. I write and I also do this podcast. I've done it for 10 years. And I see these episodes as a form of my own self expression. It might be an unconventional form of self expression, but it is profoundly creative and nourishing for me to record these episodes and to talk about my life, to talk about art, talk about cinema, and to try to articulate what art makes me feel. And I've always said that this podcast is not just about film, it's about more than film. It is about life. It's about finding a way to live. It's about finding meaning through art and being saved by art. And that's what I try to talk about. And I also try to talk about my life. This is a podcast about me, not just about films. I'm inseparable from these episodes. They are an expression of me, they are a manifestation of my inner life, my thoughts, my feelings, my heart, my soul. They are my offering. This podcast is my offering. It is the thing that I give from my heart. It is genuine and it is real and it is sincere. That's all I can do is show up as myself, to say what I think, to say what I feel, to say something true. And I hope that that reaches other people. But that is my offering. And this film makes me think about what I want to offer to others. And I think it asks us to consider what we want to offer to the world and to other people while we are here. It's also about being an artist or being creative, right? Babette doesn't really get to pursue her art as much as she would hope to, but the meal allows her to finally reconnect with it, doesn't it? This is also a film about a woman who has lost everything. She has to make a new life for herself. Ultimately, she learns that she cannot go back to where she came. She can't go back to that life because it's forever gone. And she can't go back because the world she once knew has vanished. And that's very resonant in my life right now as I go through my own experience of soul shattering grief around the death of my mother. And she joins my father, and I no longer have parents. In a lot of ways, something that really hit me, it might be the most profound thing that hit me as I watched this film, was it came to me as I watched. It's like, this woman can't go back. We learn at the end of the film she spent all the money. She spent the money on the meal and she's not going to go back to France because there's nothing waiting for her. Her husband and her son are gone. That's how I feel about my parents, is that I can't go back to the past. I've left that life. It's over. It's sealed off. It's done. It's in my memories, but I can never go back. What does it mean to not be able to go back? What do you do with that? How do you live when you can't go back to what you knew? What do you do when you've lost everything and you have to start over? That's partly what this film is about. And would I have noticed that theme as intensely 10 years ago when my mother was alive? No. But it was very powerful for me with this viewing. And I'll talk about all this more deeply, but I'm just listing out like why I think I was drawn back to the film. These are some of the reasons, is because it is about all these things, the unconventional lives, being an artist. What is a meaningful life and what does it look like? What do I want to offer other people? This was actually the perfect film for my life right now, right? Like what it means to be alive in the aftermath of the total destruction of your life. How do you keep going? It's a film that consecrates the daily pleasures of life because food is of the body. Food is this earthly pleasure, right? We have this very austere religious community that denies themselves pleasure and rich food, and this meal is about the pleasure that is here on earth. As Priscilla Parkhurst Ferguson puts it, quote, "The beauty of this world here and now is to be seen and experienced by all of us. We do ourselves and God a disservice when we fail to take pleasure in the beauty that surrounds us." Unquote. It's a beautiful film to behold. At the beginning, it's more somber and dark and bleak. And then Babette comes into the frame. Babette enters the world of these sisters' lives, and she brings a light and she brings a beauty, doesn't she? And you see it in the film that when Babette comes, we see these gorgeous sunsets and things just feel lighter and more golden. She has such a presence about her and such a spirit. I definitely understand the religious interpretations of the film, but like I said, I tend to just see her as this very ethereal. She's both ethereal but earthy, right? Like she has this spirit and this presence about her, but she's also very grounded and practical. And so I love Babette as a character as well. I think she's very interesting. So now I'm going to go through the film and talk about different things. I'm going to go deeper into some of the stuff that I touched on, but I like as I was watching it, I was like, of course I was drawn back to it. And I'm so glad that my intuition brought me back to the film. And that's what I want to talk about in this episode, is what I found inside this film. It's almost like I think certain films are almost like opening a jewelry box and finding a beautiful gemstone inside it or a beautiful ring or necklace, right? It's like laying there in the velvet and it's so beautiful and multifaceted and glittering. And that's what it feels like to watch certain films. I think this is a special film. I think it's such an interesting story that Isaac Dennison gives us. So we start with the sisters. This film has an interesting timeline because it shows us the sisters as they're older, and then it goes back in time when they were younger to show us essentially how their lives could have gone and the things that they gave up to stay with their father and to be devoted to his legacy and the religious community that he founded. And so we see them younger and then we see them older, and then they meet Babette, and then another decade or so passes, and that's when we have the meal. So it's a very interesting timeline. When we first see the sisters, Martine and Filippa, they're in their 60s or 70s. And like I said, it goes back in time to give us a sense of their backstory, how respected their father was, but he was also kind of a feared figure as well. And we see that they are, in their old age, essentially spinsters. They never got married, they never had children. And it's because their father didn't really want them to. Their father wanted them with him. He wanted their help with the religious community. And they were supposed to give up everything in order to do that. And they did. We also see in the film that they go around to bring food to sick people. So these are women who have devoted themselves to charity and to this religious community. They didn't have to, but that is what they wanted to do. They live lives that are very austere and very simple. And I think it would be easy to not fully understand the path that these sisters have chosen. But I think that it made sense to them. And so I think the film really asks us, what makes a good life? What makes a valuable life? What makes a meaningful life? Because for women, it tends to be getting married or falling in love, getting married, having children, going down that path. Whereas these sisters live a life that is devoted to other people, to charity, and to this religious community. And they have sacrificed, they have experienced personal sacrifice to have that life. They gave up any kind of relationship with a man. Martine could have been with the general. He was in love with her, and you can tell she was in love with him. Filippa was an opera singer, and she met Achille Papin, who was also an opera singer, and he was giving her singing lessons, but she abruptly stopped them because she was feeling something for him, and she did not want to have to make that choice. These are women who they deny themselves love, essentially. That is the choice that they make, and it's a hard one to understand, isn't it? Why would you want to stay and be part of this religious community? Why would you want to stay with your father? Why would you not want to become an opera singer or marry the general? But for these women, that is not the choice that they wanted to make. And you could argue, did they even have a choice? Their father was very insistent that he wanted them to be with him, that he wanted them to serve the community. They decided to put their father and the religious community above their own desires, because this is a religious community, a Christian religious community that's very self denying. They don't want to eat the decadent food. They don't want to engage in the pleasures of earthly existence. There are a lot of religious groups that are like that, that are self sacrificing, self denying, very austere and ascetic, and they deny themselves earthly pleasures, essentially. And that is the way that this religious community is, which is what makes the final feast at the end of the film even more extraordinary, is that we have a group of people who finally surrender to the senses. They surrender to the sensuous. And by sensuous, I mean of the senses, but it's also sensual. But they allow themselves to have something that they have resisted, that they have avoided for much of their lives. That's what makes the meal so unforgettable, is that they're not used to food that is so rich and decadent and pleasurable. They deny themselves pleasure. These sisters are a bit frustrating, aren't they? Because we don't fully understand their decisions, why they gave in to their father, why they didn't pursue these men and live out their desires, perhaps. But in their world, that is not what they wanted. In The Red Shoes, I talked about a woman who chooses art above all else. And then I also recently did an episode about All That Heaven Allows, in which a woman chooses love. But the sisters in this film are making a very different choice. Filippa could have filled opera houses with fans of her voice. She could have been up on the stage, and Martine could have had a life with the general, most likely would have had children with him. They're not choosing love. They're not choosing the stage. They're choosing a very different life. They're choosing a small, simple life, a life of religious devotion, a life of serving others, serving the sick and the elderly. So I think in a lot of ways, this is also a film about how things don't always go according to plan, that our lives can have restrictions and limitations, and sometimes we have to make sacrifices. This happens to Babette. One moment she is a chef at Cafe Anglais, living out her dream of being in the culinary arts and being the genius that she is with food. The general says that at the end of the film, that she was considered a genius. And then these sisters could have had a particular life, but they happened to be part of this religious community that made that difficult for them or made it impossible. And I think about this even in terms of my own life. I think in some ways I did see myself in these sisters, not just because I'm a spinster, I'm child free and single and all of that, but in the way that I devoted much of my life to my mother. I lived with her my entire life. And in the last 5.5 years of her life, I was her caregiver. That was a tremendous sacrifice. It was very difficult, but I did it because I loved her, and there was no question about doing it. I gave up certain possibilities for my life in order to do that. So while other people were getting married, having children, building careers out in the world, I really stayed closer to my mother because we relied on each other. We needed each other, particularly after my father died when I was a teenager. She wanted me to be with her. She wanted me to be near her. And I was very intertwined with her and very close to her. So for me, it was always unthinkable to leave my mother. There really was no choice involved. And I do wonder if that's part of the motivation of these sisters. They're close to their father. Clearly, they don't have their mother. So maybe it's also they can't imagine another way of life. They can't imagine leaving him, leaving that community, right? Because then you have to go into the unknown. You have to go into something that you've never experienced before. Religion is also a very powerful force in people's lives. It can be the glue that holds people together. It can be the thing that you center your life around. I've never been religious, but for some people it's very hard to leave a religious community where they get that support. So for these two sisters, I think it's perhaps unthinkable to leave the congregation and to leave their father. It's perhaps not where their heart is. Their heart is with that community, not with those men. They desire those men, but at the end of the day, maybe the life that they really want to live, they don't want to live, Filippa doesn't want to live on the stage. Martine doesn't necessarily want to commit herself to a life with the general. The life with their religious community takes precedence and is more important. And being devoted to that cause and being devoted to their father's legacy. So years pass, the father dies, and in 1871, Babette appears on their doorstep. She's fleeing civil unrest in France that has claimed the lives of her husband and son. She's been exiled and she's now a refugee in Denmark. She comes with the letter from Achille Papin, like I said, who asks the sisters to take her in. The thing that Babette is fleeing is the Paris Commune. This was a brief revolutionary period in Paris in 1871 when working class citizens took control of the city. The French government eventually crushed this uprising in what became a very violent crackdown. It led to mass executions and it forced many people like Babette to escape. In many ways, Babette's life with the sisters is like her afterlife. It's this new beginning or this second chance at life because her husband and her son are dead. She has nothing left. And when she goes to the sisters, she says, I'll work for nothing because these sisters don't have a lot of money. These are not rich women or anything like that. And so she says, I will offer to work for nothing. And she also says, if you don't take me in, the only thing left for me is death. So these sisters represent a connection to life. They are a new beginning and a second chance for Babette because she can't go back. And she knows it even then that she can't go back. But later on, when she wins the lottery, and there is this possibility that she could move back to France, she could have some of that life again. At least, I'm sure she could establish herself again and be a chef. But she realizes, I think, that she can't go back. There's nothing to go back to. The world that she knew is forever gone. She's in exile. She's a refugee. She has to create a new life with the sisters in Denmark. This is a very powerful part of the film for me, is her being a refugee, her fleeing that violence and finding a safe harbor, finding shelter and sanctuary with these sisters. She's trying to find a way forward. She's trying to find a way to keep living. And that part of the film profoundly resonated with me now that I've lost my parents. The thing is, when we rewatch films, sometimes we are a radically different person when we watch that film again. I don't know, it's just hitting me in this moment. And the film meets us in this second version, or this other version that we are. There was the me that watched Babette's Feast the first time 10 years ago or whenever. And then there's me today and everything that's happened in between those years. I think about that a lot. I've even thought about it with the anniversary of this podcast because I've been thinking about devoting an episode to reflecting on these 10 years. And I just think about who I was a decade ago and who I am now and how different I feel and how my life is so different. And so that's also why I think it's important to rewatch things periodically. Like I said, I like for time to pass because I like to see what version of me shows up when I experience the film again and what I find in it. Sometimes we are a radically different person and we connect with things in the film that we didn't connect to the first time we saw it or in previous rewatches, right? She's in exile. She's a refugee. She's lost her home. She's lost her homeland. She's lost her husband and her son. And she goes to these women's doorstep with nothing and they take her in. How powerful is that? Now that I think about it, if these women, if the sisters, Martine and Filippa, if they had gotten married and left home and built their lives, who would have taken Babette in all those years later? So I think the film is about, yes, our lives get derailed and things don't go according to plan. And maybe we don't have the life that we planned on or that other people think that we should have. Because I think a lot of people would look at these sisters and think, oh, they were beautiful. Why didn't they get married? They should have done that. But if they had done that, if they had gone down that path, there would have been nobody to take in Babette. And so I think that's something interesting to linger on, is that we might think we're derailed. We may think our lives are small, that things didn't go according to plan. But how do our lives impact other people? I mean, I even think about that with my mom. If I had gone and gotten married, had kids, and left my mom, who would have taken care of her at the end of her life? Who would have taken care of her for those 5.5 years? Who would have taken care of her as she was dying? Which is what I did when she was in hospice near the end. If I had been living somewhere else far away from her, I would have missed out on spending time with her and being with her. Would I have been able to ensure that she was okay, that she was safe, that she did not die alone? So even though I have pain about my life, if I had not been there, who would have been there? Who would have taken care of her all those years? And so I think sometimes those sacrifices serve something greater that we can't always see. And our lives might seem small and insignificant, but we don't know how we could be essential to somebody else. I showed up for my mother. I stayed by her side all those years, and I made sure that near the end of her life, she did not pass from this world alone. So I know no matter how small I feel, I was essential to at least one other person. I was essential to her. I know that my life mattered to somebody, that my life was important. And maybe that's all it's about at the end of the day when it comes to our lives and what we offer is that we matter to maybe at least one person. Maybe I don't matter to a bunch of people. I don't have a lot of status and accomplishments in this world. I'm pretty low on the hierarchy, if I'm being honest. But my life matters and my life is important. It was at least important to her, even if it's not important to anybody else. At least I know that I was there for her and that I loved her. And I do think it's an act of love what those sisters do for Babette. Maybe other people don't see it that way. But I see it as an act of love, of maybe God's love. These women are living out their religion when they take her in. These are people who believe in the reality of God and of God's love. Their act of generosity and charity toward Babette shows them living their values. It's taking in a stranger, showing compassion for a stranger. And I believe it's an act of love to take her in. They give her refuge, they give her a place to land, to begin again, a place to keep living. And that's a kind of salvation, what they give to her. They may not realize that that's what they're giving to her, but it is. It's not just salvation in an abstract way, a parable or a story in the Bible. It's not just something abstract or it's not just something that you talk about. It's an action. It's embodied in the world through how they treat Babette. It's their goodness coming out. They give her a place to live where she can continue to work, and her days are filled with something other than that grief. It's a film about women helping each other. I love how the film really centers these three women. They didn't choose the men. The sisters didn't choose the general and Achille Papin. The father's dead, so the men are peripheral in a lot of ways. This is a world of women for the most part as we're watching the film. The sisters and Babette, it's mutual care, mutual salvation. And I think that that's the way that I interpret that meal, that French feast that Babette creates. It's not just a gift for the community or an offering to the community. It's many things, right? It's also maybe a brief resurrection of her previous life. I think it's also a gift to the sisters or a repayment for what they gave to her. Maybe she attempts to repay such an act of generosity and kindness because they could have turned her away and they didn't. But it's a film about women caring for each other. And I want to linger on Babette, her presence in the film. She brings a kind of light. And I said that earlier. You notice it in the film. It started very drab. The colors were very dark and bleak. And then she comes in and we have beautiful sunsets and the colors seem brighter. She has this spirit and this light when she comes into town. The people are very kind to her and they take her in. She has a very magical effect. The sisters talk about how they're making more money now that she's there. The work that Babette does allows the sisters to spend more time with people in the congregation. They go around and they do charity work. It allows them to devote more time to their work, which is the most important thing to them. They're not having to do the cleaning and the cooking and deal with these domestic tasks that Babette takes care of. And Babette holds herself with a lot of dignity. Like when she goes to buy the food, she'll stand up for herself. And if she doesn't think that the fish is good quality, she'll haggle. And she tells one of the grocers at one point that she got something and it was rancid. And she's like, make sure that it's better this time. She has taste and standards and backbone, right? And dignity, and she speaks up for quality. She knows what she wants. She knows who she is. And she knows about food because that is her art as a chef. She's a woman devoted to the art of cooking, but she doesn't really get to practice that art once she's in Denmark because the food that she's cooking for the sisters is quite drab. It's not the type of food that's in the feast at the end, and it's certainly not the same food that she was serving at the Cafe Anglais. She's a culinary chef, and that is an art. She's devoted to nourishment, pleasure, the sensuous experience of being alive in a body that can taste and feel and eat. And I think that through food, she brings light and beauty into the world. And certainly in that final feast, right? That big feast at the end. And French cuisine has such an exalted reputation around the world, doesn't it? For that richness in particular. We learned so much about Babette through that final meal, which I'll go into in more depth later. She's a woman with integrity. She's a woman that wants to do something well. And she's someone who wants to give nourishment and pleasure to other people. That's part of what's very powerful about the culinary arts. It's an intimate type of offering. It's so different than other arts. Like when you make a book, hundreds of people might read that. When you make a film, thousands or millions eventually might see it. But when you're a chef, it's such a different art, isn't it? A meal is fleeting. It's on the plate and you eat it, and it has to be experienced with the body. It is totally of the body. It's this temporary, fleeting thing, but it brings an immense amount of pleasure. It's this thing that exists for a moment, and it's this exchange between her and the people at the meal. And I think that says a lot about Babette and the kind of woman that she is. She wants to give that pleasure, that comfort, that nourishment, that beauty. She wants to bring beauty into other people's lives. And she's at the service of that. So 14 years after the sisters take Babette in, they are going to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the birth of the pastor, which is the sisters' father. The religious community is going to hold this dinner. It's going to be held on December 15th. At this point, the religious community founded by Martine and Filippa's father is falling apart. There's a lot of discord and infighting and pettiness and nastiness. They have really forgotten the core of their mission. They have forgotten that goodness, and they're not treating each other well in the lead up to this anniversary dinner. It's around this time that Babette also receives a letter saying that she's won the lottery in France. She's miraculously won 10,000 francs. And so she tells the sisters that she wants to hold the dinner for the pastor's birthday. She wants to create this elaborate anniversary meal, and she insists on paying for it. She tells them, "Have I ever asked you for anything?" And she says that it comes from her heart, and that what she wants to do is something that's coming from her heart. And I love that because it connects the meal to this idea of offering something from your heart. And I just think that's really beautiful. I really think that we should all stop and think about what we are offering to other people. What is our offering? And what are we offering from our hearts? Because you can offer something or give something, but it may not come from your heart. And I think there's just something really beautiful about that. And I've always said, for instance, that these episodes that I create, that they come from my heart, that I share my heart and my soul on this podcast. And I stand by that. And I still say it. And it is the truth. I'm a believer in offering something from your heart. And you feel with Babette that that's what she's doing with this meal, is that this comes from a very pure place inside her. So I think it's not only a film that asks us, what do you want to offer? But what do you want to offer from your heart? Right? I just think I don't know. I find that very moving. I guess because that's how I live, is that I try to offer something genuine and sincere from my heart. It's not easy because I feel like in the world today, it's not really about offering your heart, or it can be almost dangerous or very vulnerable to do that. I feel like everything's become a performance. It's become a promotion, or it's why I've like had to start protecting myself. I've even had to leave social media and stuff like that because I feel like what I offer is not really valued or appreciated. I continue to offer it. I think part of offering from your heart is letting go of any control over how it is received, letting go of desiring any kind of reciprocation. You are giving from a pure and selfless place inside yourself. For it to come from your heart, you release expectations on it. You are giving purely to give. What you are getting from it is just the act of giving. The act of giving itself is enough. It doesn't matter what comes after that. And I believe that that's what this meal is for Babette. She gives it. It is her art, and that is why I think this is such a powerful film about being an artist. Is that's the point of art, is what it gives us in the process of creating it. That's why I say I make these episodes and they come from my heart. Or for other people, it could be writing, it could be any other art. The process itself is the gift. The process itself is the point. I think that's what it means to give from your heart, is that you release any kind of expectations about the response to it or what it will do. You give it and you hope that it reaches who it needs to reach. And that's what I've always said about this podcast. But I have had to stop promoting it. I have had to remove myself from online spaces that felt very artificial and hollow and not like were not nourishing for me and were not positive for me. And I decided, you know what? I'm going to offer this. I'm going to release these episodes. And I hope that they find the people who need to find them, but I don't have control over it anymore. And when Babette makes that meal, she has no control over how it's received. She has no control over what the congregation will think about it. At first, they're almost scared or they're worried, like, oh, this is too rich. This is too decadent. We can't let ourselves indulge in this. But eventually they come around and they enjoy it and they get pleasure from it. And they allow themselves to feel pleasure as they are eating it. But she has no control over it. She spends it all. She spends all the money. She gives it her best. And that's all she can do. And isn't that a really powerful idea about how to live, how to create, how to how to release your offering to the world? And it's something that is just very pure, right? It comes from her heart. The sisters are quite sad when they think that Babette is going to leave, because Babette says, I've won the lottery. I want to create this meal and then I'm going to go back to France. They think that they are going to lose her. They're sad. They don't see her just as a cook and a housekeeper. She has changed their lives. She's helped them. The things that Babette does, the cooking, the cleaning, these are things that are often denigrated. They're seen as women's work, right? They're not seen as important. And yet, they are the infrastructure of our daily lives, aren't they? And the sisters, thanks to Babette, are able to manage their lives better because she is there and because of the work that she does and because of her presence. And so Babette is this figure where the sisters, they didn't even know what they were missing until they met her. And I think we have people who we meet in our lives who are like that, where we can't even imagine our lives without this person. They've become so essential. Her presence is felt and her absence will be felt as well. And I think it speaks to these times in our lives where we meet people who shift the ground that we're walking on, people who change our lives forever, where we can't even imagine going back to life without them because our contact with them is so life altering. And that is what Babette brings. She brings that spirit, she brings that presence into their lives. And that's why they're sad that she's leaving. We see the preparation for the feast. There's food and glassware that are arriving. And in an interview, Gabriel Axel, I think, said that everything in the film was authentic, that they made sure to get things from France that you see in that feast. All of that stuff is genuinely from France as well. And so we see the chopping, we see the animals, there's even a cow's head and a turtle. We see the whole preparation, the elaborate multi day preparation for this feast. And we're watching Babette in her art. She's performing her art, right? Just like if you were watching someone paint or sculpt or write or direct a film, we are watching an artist at work, but her materials are food. We see things being boiled and chopped and cooked. You see the nuts and bolts of this meal being put together. And it made me think about how, like, this meal, I think it's also like an act of consecrating the pleasures of this world, because the religious aspect of this group is that they refuse worldly things. And I think that's often a problem when it comes to very strict, devout religious people, right? Or monotheistic religious people, is that they're always waiting for the afterlife. They're always thinking about heaven and what comes next. They're thinking about another world instead of reveling in and appreciating and fully opening themselves up to the life that we are in right now, the world that we are living in. And so this meal is a celebration of the flesh, of worldly pleasures, of the body, of being in this world and in our bodies and able to taste. Food is this doorway into the pleasures of the flesh, pleasures of this world. It's one of the ecstasies of being a flesh and blood human, right? Is food. Food is very pleasurable for a lot of people. The last 30 minutes of this film are devoted to the meal itself and how it unfolds. And these people are showing up, they're wearing black. You would think that they were going to a funeral, but it's not that surprising, is it? It makes their transformation as they eat the meal even more fascinating, because they show up and they're very somber and in black. And then as they eat, they come alive. As they're drinking, as they're eating the different courses, they start to soften. They start to smile. There's this light in their eyes. And everything is so beautiful. There's crystal on the table, there's candles, there's candlelight. You feel this sense of coziness, warmth, connection, community, right? Just people sitting at a table together and enjoying food. Isn't that one of the simple pleasures of life? Maybe it's one that we even take for granted. I mean, I just think about how I'll never get to sit down with my parents again and have a meal with them. And that's something that I remember from my childhood, is like me and my parents sitting down and eating together. When you think about it, it's like meals are this time of togetherness. They become part of our memories. They shape who we are as we sit with the people that we love and we eat and we drink. It's such a simple pleasure, but it's something that when it's gone, right? Like, I'll never have another meal with my mom and dad. So it's just, and I think about that. I really do. I think about those memories that I have with them. So meals, they bring people together. They really do. This congregation really softens. They even talk about the pastor. They talk about how he taught them to love one another, right? It's like they remember that love and remember why they are connected to each other, why they are in this community at all. And at one point, as they're eating, the general makes like this speech and talks about how years ago he was at a dinner in France that was done by a woman. And he says that she was considered a culinary genius. He uses those words. She was seen as a chef who merged the physical with the spiritual, so that her meals and her food were spiritual. And so food is, in a way, a kind of communion. eating and sharing meals with other people can be joyous, right? It can be this positive and wonderful thing. I hate the way food, I think particularly in Western culture, obviously it gets weighed down with a lot of negatives. A lot of people have a complicated relationship with food. It's often seen as negative or bad, or don't eat too much, don't indulge, don't eat bad food, don't eat this, don't eat that, right? Like food can become a source of stress and difficulty. So it makes a film like this even more beautiful, I think, because food is not the enemy. Food is something that brings pleasure and joy and nourishment and even something spiritual, and it connects people to each other who are sharing a meal. Enjoying food, it's one of the hallmarks of being alive. Taking pleasure in food is about being alive, right? And I'll also say, like, something that's been difficult for me in my grief is sometimes I remember the food that I cooked for my mom. That is like a really big trigger for me. I will be cooking at times and I will start crying because I think about her. I remember certain ways that she liked her food cooked, like the way that she liked her eggs or a recipe that I made for her. And so food can kind of be this thing that opens up a wound or something, that it can be very painful for me at times. Or I think about when we went to certain restaurants together and I didn't expect that. I didn't think I would remember so many meals and things like that, but it actually can be very painful because food is a major part of our lives. It's part of our relationships with other people. So the food, it makes sense that the food and the meal and the drink, that it opens them up to each other. They remember why they're together, why they're in this congregation. They show care for each other. They stop denying themselves. They stop rejecting what is earthly, right? They open themselves to pleasure and indulgence and decadence for one time in their life, for one evening in their life. They let themselves indulge in something that they've avoided and rejected and kept at bay. Because I don't know if you can deny yourself forever. I don't know if you can live in that kind of denying your desires, denying yourself anything. Like, who can live that kind of austere, ascetic existence forever? Like, sometimes you need to indulge in something and enjoy something. Actually, it's a reminder when they are indulging in the meal, it's a reminder that we do have human urges and human desires, and they are human. Even though they are religious and very devout, they are still human beings in human bodies and they need pleasure. It's okay to have that. You don't have to deny yourself everything. And if you think about it, these women denied themselves a lot of things in order to serve other people. And so this meal is like this brief moment in their lives when they finally give into that, right? Like they let themselves indulge and enjoy something because they've always avoided it. Like they never kissed those men. They never kissed the general or Achille Papin. They never had sex. They never even let themselves go down a path where they pursued their own desires. They sacrificed and sacrificed. They've stayed away from anything that would tempt them or seduce them. And so a meal like this feast, it's this moment when they can't avoid something rich and decadent and luxurious. They finally get to taste it, to experience it, to let themselves experience something decadent, something maybe forbidden that they're not supposed to have and that they're not supposed to want or enjoy. After the meal, it's really beautiful to just watch them sitting together, people in the congregation. You have some of the couples who are holding hands. One couple kisses. There's like this carnality tied to food, isn't there? And then we have the general who confesses to Martine that she's been with him every day of his life, that he's been in love with her his entire life. So we get this declaration of love as well. They're not in control anymore. Like, they're a little bit tipsy, they're a little bit drunk, they're a little bit messy. They're not in control of themselves and rigid and all of that, right? It's like they're a little bit out of control. Filippa sings some opera and she's playing the piano. It's just like this really electric, convivial atmosphere. And it comes about because of that meal. It loosens them up. They have emotions. They're not in control everything. They're not in control of everything. They get to have an appetite. They get to indulge. They get to sing. They get to desire. They get to profess their love for a fleeting moment. They're human. They're not these cardboard cutouts, these one dimensional pious people. They're allowed a greater range of emotions. That's what the meal brings out of them. The pleasure of the food, the enjoyment of the food just leads them to being more open, more free, less formal. There's something almost healing about the meal, that it heals their souls, that it heals the rift that had grown between them. And I think that's why this offering by Babette is so powerful, is because it's an offering that brings people together. And you could even argue that it gets them back to the essence of God and of God's love. They remember their love for each other. Because over time, when you live such an austere way, in such an ascetic, austere way, it can wear you down, perhaps, right? Or as time passes, you can get bitter or you can harden. And maybe they had forgotten about what they believed, or they had stopped living it or embodying it. They sort of lost sight of the mission, lost sight of the goodness. There's a disillusionment or a cynicism that can set in. And that's what was happening. The congregation was turning against each other. And so this meal is like a reset. They go outside and they're standing under the stars. They're holding hands. They're gathering together. They're singing. The sisters are watching them, and I think one of the sisters says something like, "The stars feel closer tonight." And I thought that was really beautiful, and everybody's smiling. I just love that. I just love the way that feels. Like, this film has a feeling inside of it, doesn't it? It's like this warmth. Instead of turning against each other, they turn toward each other. That's the miracle of the meal. That's the miracle that Babette has performed. And when Babette is talking to the sisters, she explains that she was a chef at Cafe Anglais and that a party of 12 would eat for 10,000 francs at the Cafe Anglais. And that's exactly what she spent. And she has spent all of her money, all of the lottery money. And she reveals to them that she's not going back to Paris. And this is such a shocking moment in the film when you find out what she did. When you find out that she spent all of that money and did all of that work just for that meal, for those people. I was very moved at this point in the film when she talks about not going back to France, because she essentially says, nobody's waiting for me. That's the word she uses. Nobody's waiting for me, and they're all gone. It's very stark, isn't it? That nobody's waiting for her. I think what she realizes is that the only people who matter are these sisters in this congregation and this community and town that she lives in. This is her life now. And life has no value and it has no meaning if we are not in relationship to other people. What matters is each other. And you learn that when nobody's waiting for you anymore. You learn that when you've lost everything, when you have lost the people that you love more than anything, the way Babette has, the way that I have. Because when nobody's waiting for you, when your home is gone, that's a loneliness that is beyond language. And so she stays where, not just where she's wanted, she stays where she's needed. She stays where people are, people who care about her, because nobody's waiting in France anymore. She could go back, but what would she go back to? Ashes, ashes and ruins and absence. She had to leave that life, didn't she? I teared up when she said, "Nobody's waiting for me." It just hit me like a knife in the heart. She went to these sisters, right? She had to leave. She had to leave that life. It was violently torn away from her, and she had to leave it. And she went to these sisters. She went to them, and they took her in. They didn't have to, but out of their own hearts, they took her in. And this meal is an offering. And when we give from our hearts, that matters. That is the ultimate affirmation of life, what we offer to people and what they offer to us. And if we are offering something from our hearts, that can be a kind of restoration and healing. We don't know who will receive that offering or what they will do with it. And we don't know how it could change their lives. What we offer can connect other people back to themselves and back to life. That's what art can do. It can connect us very deeply to ourselves, to each other, and to life. And that's what she does with that meal. That is her offering. And the sisters tell her, "We'll remember this meal for the rest of our lives." She's not just offering food, she's offering an experience, a deeper experience of life through that food, isn't she? That is her art. That is her genius. And I think about all the artists who offer their art, all the people who offer their gifts to the world. And I think about how in my own darkness, that is what I've reached for. I wish this world valued art as much as it values all of the wrong things, because I have gone toward art so much in my grief. I am so grateful for the offerings that artists have made. I am grateful for the music and the films and the books. I am grateful for this film. I'm grateful for Three Colors Blue. I'm grateful for poetry, for all of these offerings that have been given, and they've come from the heart. And I think friendship is an offering. I'm grateful for the friends that have been there for me and offered me care and support and have witnessed me and have witnessed my grief and let me share what I needed to share. What we offer matters. And I think we should think very deeply about what we want to offer and how we want to offer it. She offered it from her heart. And look what she does. Look at the miracle she performs through that meal and the way that it changes their lives. It's extraordinary. And when Babette talks about, she spent all the money, the sisters are like, "You shouldn't have given all that money away for us. You won't have money anymore. You'll be poor." That's what they say. And Babette says something so unforgettable. She says, "An artist is never poor." And we learn so much about Babette in that one statement. She sees herself as an artist. She sees what she does as art, and it is. She says an artist is never poor. She's saying that her offering and what she gave, it does not diminish her. It doesn't take away from her. When she gave that meal, when she spent that money and cooked that meal, she did not lose anything because she was making an offering. That is not a loss or a subtraction. It was the fullest expression of her heart and her soul and her goodness, that meal. And it made me think about how there are things that cannot be taken from us and cannot be destroyed. That is why many people who are artists, that's why they create. That's why I write. That's why I share. That's why I do this podcast. That's why I speak. That's why Babette cooks the meal. That's why a painter paints. Why a musician creates music. Because there are things inside of us that cannot be destroyed. There is something inside me that cannot be destroyed, no matter what I lose, no matter what this world tries to take from me, what life tries to take from me. And that's what I think she means when she says that an artist is never poor, is that you can never take away what is inside me. You can never take away my soul. You can never take away my spirit. So when she does that offering from her heart, she does not see it as a loss. She gives and she reaps something from that. She gets something from it. It's not a diminishment. There's not less of her in the act of making that meal and paying for it. There's not less of her, there's more. And then she quotes Achille Papin, and she tells them that one time he said to her, "Through all the world, there goes one long cry from the heart of the artist. Give me leave to do my utmost." And that is what is so extraordinary about this film, is that I feel like in a way it kind of sneaks up on you, where you think it's one thing. You think it's about these sisters and their cook in Denmark, and it's about this congregation, and maybe it's about religion and all this stuff. But really, by the end of the film, it's almost like a manifesto about an artist, about being an artist, about what you create and what you offer from your heart, and how that in and of itself is a kind of spiritual nourishment for other people who take it in. And I think ultimately that's what this film is about for me. But there's a bit of sadness about the film as well for me, in that in many ways Babette's life was taken from her and her dreams were taken from her. What we see through this meal is her gift, and she should be at Cafe Anglais serving food and creating food, right? She should be a chef at a restaurant, devoting her life to her art. But that was taken from her, just as her husband and her son were taken from her. Her life was interrupted by the war and by violence. And through this meal, we briefly see her genius, and it also gives her a chance to relive that life, to, for a little while, engage in her art, in the French cuisine that she had to give up for all these years. She's an artist who isn't able to perform her art, but she's still an artist. Even though she doesn't get to cook that French cuisine every day, it is still inside her. She still has that gift. That gift is never taken from her. It is always part of her, because there are things inside us that cannot be destroyed. That is why we create. That is why we write. That is why we share our gifts when we're able to. And I believe we have a responsibility to share our gifts with the world, because you don't know how it could affect somebody else. 10 years ago, I started making these episodes, and I had no idea who they would reach or how they would affect people. I still don't know. I get messages now and then, and I know that I've affected people in some way, and that's all I can ask for in this life. We don't know what our offering can do for somebody else. We have no idea. That's what makes it so important to offer something from the heart. But Babette is deprived of engaging in this art the way that she should be able to. But she's still an artist, and it's still inside of her. And that's what she shows with this meal. That is what creating the meal gives her, is that she knows, I'm still an artist, and I'm still a chef, and I made these people happy. I made them happy, and I did my utmost. She knows that. And Filippa tells her, I think she says, like, in heaven or paradise, you'll get to be the artist that you were meant to be. You'll enchant the angels. That's basically what she says at the end. Basically, you'll be rewarded in the next life for what you've been denied in this life. Babette has lost so much, but like she said, an artist is never poor. Everything's been taken from her, but she is not poor. That is all I have to say about this film. Thank you so much for listening. I hope that you liked this episode. I really enjoyed talking about this beautiful film. Until next time, keep watching great films.